Hey everyone, Internet PCS book reader here. Today I want to talk about Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Jane Austen is one of the most known classic literature writers. She was born in the late 17th century when the average lifespan was around 36 years. It's because at the time she was born, child mortality was still so high. It's why she was born 7 out of 8 siblings. She had to move a lot of the time at first because she needed to follow her parents moving back and forth and then her father's death. Her family is considered gentry, which is a derogatory for middle class back then, so they still live a comfortable enough life with Jane and her siblings being literate, which is quite hard to achieve back then. And it was in this condition that she started writing. Her siblings becoming her editors and critic of her story when she read her draft to them. She didn't publish a lot of books because she died at the age of 41 due to an illness. A few months ago, for the first time, I've read her first book, Sense and Sensibility, which for a debut is pretty impressive. So I thought I'd give her arguably most popular book, Pride and Prejudice, a try. The book starts by introducing us to the Bennet family, an offbeat family with 5 daughters. The father is a dude who seems to only care about making the wealth of the family grows, and the mother is an airhead character who don't seem to know much of the world despite already having 5 children. And since 1800, having 5 daughters and no son means that none of the daughters can inherit their father's wealth since they're women. Thankfully, a lot of their older daughters like Jane and Elizabeth Bennet is already of marriage age, and thankfully, a rich single man named Mr. Bingley come to their neighborhood to throw a party. And with him he brings someone named Mr. Darcy, also another single man who is richer than even Mr. Bingley. Mrs. Bennet the mother sees this as an opportunity to marry her daughters so they can inherit her husband's wealth through their husband, so the two party met at the party. Mr. Bingley was handsome and very friendly since he wanted to experience the city country life that these people have, so everybody got attached to him easily. Meanwhile, Mr. Darcy, although also as handsome as Mr. Bingley, was not as friendly. He even started refusing to dance because everybody is too ugly for him to dance with, and they are all lower than his standard for dancing, so everyone at the party disliked him, including Elizabeth Bennet, the second daughter of the Bennet family, the most level-headed of all the daughters. Mr. Darcy even named her by name and insulted her about how she's not good enough for a dance with him, which of course left a bad impression for him. And from here, I think the book intention of separating between superficial goodness and actual good person is easy to see, about not judging people at their first impression or by their cover, I guess, which for someone who often left a bad impression, I highly agree for my own sakes too. But the other attempt at separating between superficial goodness and true goodness or whatever that means doesn't always come across as good, I guess. Mr. Bingley is supposed to be a good person who are easily swayed by other people, and Mr. Darcy is supposed to be a person that is awkward at communicating, but is supposed to be a good person. But I've seen both guys like Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy, and a lot of time they're not like these characters, especially Mr. Darcy. Mr. Bingley becomes a person who, despite being good, doesn't have what it takes to make strong decisions, which I guess is not exactly the best kind of good, both in real life and in the story. But true nice guy Mr. Darcy are usually people who in real life goes, I wonder why nobody wanted to be friends with me. They misunderstood me. Even if I treated them like garbage, that doesn't mean I see them as garbage. I'm actually a good person, on the inside. And in the story, he's supposed to be our male protagonist that is socially awkward and might come off as unfriendly, but he started by calling everybody ugly and beneath him for dancing. That's not just a bad first impression or socially awkward, that's just being mean and unfriendly on purpose for no reason. I'm socially awkward and a lot of my friends are too. I can barely string a sentence together that makes sense outside of me reading the scripts I wrote for the video, but I wouldn't call other people ugly or lower than my standard, that's just weird behavior. And in the story, as he started getting closer to Elizabeth, who is the female main protagonist of the story that is supposed to be his love interest, he kept saying, oh no, I really like talking to Elizabeth. Thank God she's so ugly so I didn't get too attached to her, which is such a weird thing to think about other people. A lot of the other characters outside of these two is supposed to be that vain, but Mr. Darcy, who is supposed to be someone we cheer on in the story and presented as a guy we're supposed to like as the main love interest, kept saying and thinking these out of pocket thoughts makes it harder to cheer for him to be the main romantic partner for Elizabeth. While true there are a lot of well-spoken charismatic people who are taking advantage of other people's weaknesses in real life, he's not the opposite of this guy, which is why I cannot really take him seriously as characters. who is supposed to be well-spoken, charismatic, and good-looking antagonist, I can understand why Elizabeth would trust him over Mr. Darcy, not just because he looks trustworthy, but because of how unreliable Darcy is. Wickham lied about how Darcy took what is supposed to be given to him by Mr. Darcy's family, and Elizabeth believed Wickham over Darcy and over the closest people in her life that was for Mr. Darcy, including Elizabeth's own family. I kinda get it. And this being the main struggle for Elizabeth in the story, her being described as stupid for trusting Mr. Wickham over Mr. Darcy, which again only halfway makes sense. Yes, she shouldn't have trusted a stranger she just met, especially when that stranger is trying to rage bait her to be angry at another person, but Mr. Darcy is not exactly giving her much to work with. This feels more like all three of them have some fault in the situation, over Mr. Darcy is the only innocent type of scenario the book is trying to portray. There are other smaller antagonists that move the plot forward, like William Collins, a foolish man who tried to marry Elizabeth not because he loves her, but only because he thinks that he should marry his version of an ideal woman which he sees Elizabeth as, which is quite an early version of female objectification. Elizabeth obviously rejects him because she doesn't want to live an unhappy life like her parents, and Collins, despite marrying another character in the story, spent most of the story still trying to prove to people that he's not hurt at all by Elizabeth's rejection. He's early 1800 nice guy TM who often goes, "Well, I've been really nice to these ladies, but they did not reciprocate my feelings at all because them bitches prefer bad people, unlike nice old me." And as an antagonist, he's perfect for his purpose in the story. Another one of these antagonists is Catherine, Mr. Darcy's aunt, who is trying to have Darcy marry her sickly daughter, his cousin, because she thinks that they all should inherit each other well. She's the embodiment of practicality without considering the consequences of those practicality that ignores all human emotions just because they get in the way of her plan. But for the most part, the driving force of the plot is Mr. Wickham as an antagonist. When Darcy forces Mr. Bingley to separate himself from Jane, his image got worse in Elizabeth's eyes and her family, and conveniently, Wickham is the person that becomes the only subject where Darcy can one-up Elizabeth for being right, which I still think is such a weird way to build the character relation. Even the way Elizabeth started changing her mind about who Darcy is as a person is through reading a letter that he wrote explaining the true character of Wickham. To be fair, Darcy do progress beyond the mean, inconsiderate man who uses his awkwardness as a shield to grow, and Elizabeth learned not to judge people just based on their first impression and looks. But these two together doesn't have that much chemistry outside of them having to deal with Wickham together, since Wickham decided to groom the youngest daughter in the family who doesn't have as much sense and sensibility yet, since she's one of the most ignorant characters in the story who cling to being immature for the entirety of the book. I wish Elizabeth and Darcy's chemistry is bonded in ways more than these very few interactions which have less to do with them and more to do with other people in their life. They even got married at the end of the story because of, again, someone else tried to interfere with them becoming a couple even when they are not a couple yet, thus resulting in them becoming a couple. Also, outside of this plot, a lot of the story can be very one-note because they are mostly rich people doing rich people things and talking about rich people problems while judging other people by calling them not behaving as their station befits them, except for Elizabeth and Darcy of course, when the plot needs them to be, not like the other rich people. The story could really use more normal people that is not as entitled as these ones, but this book was written before the rise of realism, so for better or worse, the story doesn't have the edge that those brings. Even so, it still have a lot of very well written scenes. Most of the characters are vain, self-centered, narcissistic, and greedy, but there's enough difference in most of them that you can tell who's who, at least for the major characters in the story. I can see why it's considered a classic. It told a very engaging story about the damage that Pride and Prejudice could bring, as the title said. I can't imagine how it became so popular, considering how original it is when it was released back in the 1800s. I give this a 3.75. What do you think? Let me know if I missed anything, so leave your thoughts in the comment below and subscribe to the channel. That's about it. See ya.